Be honest, when you hear the word psychopath, you probably likely imagine, a villain from a horror film or a ruthless murderer, a conniving criminal. In reality, psychopaths are real people that can live seemingly normal lives. They are everywhere. Politics, on your TV screen, around your neighbourhood, and definitely in your workplace, because surveys showing psychopaths thrive in leadership positions, whether it is politics, entertainment or business. In fact, recent estimates suggest that 1 in every 5 CEOs has psychopathic traits. And this is because these are the same traits that make someone a successful leader that can also describe a psychopath. Well, Paul Littlejohn is with us today from Wingman Executive Coaching. We're going to be hearing from clinical psychologist Dr. Thrier later on today. Paul, that idea that 1 in 5 CEOs might be a psychopath is pretty startling. So be honest, have you encountered any or many in your time?
Good afternoon. It's lovely to be here. I mean, it is a big number, and I think we know that, of course, these tendencies are on a spectrum, which makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
But absolutely, one of the real challenges is that the behaviours that indicate sort of success in leadership, boldness, charisma, risk-taking, high levels of control, ultimately success, often overlap with some of these traits of the spectrum of being a psychopath or a narcissist that you also hear.
So let's explore that a little bit, what it means to be a workplace psychopath. How do those traits manifest in leadership roles? Because ultimately, as you say, it's drive, it's maybe lack of empathy, if you're tramping on people to get to the top. Is this a problem?
It really is, and you've picked on one of them. So the first is this control. That's really important. So that leads to your lack of trust, certainly trust from leadership into the team, which is rampant. And of course, then you have that micromanagement that follows. And I think there's a lot of discussion about that. The second is empathy, which you've called out. And while there's lots of rational empathy that can be deployed, the pretense of empathy, it often doesn't last. And that leads to this real feeling of abuse and manipulation and really just genuinely decisions that are not for the good of the whole, they're for the good of the individual. And thirdly, you have this sense of ego, which leads to, again, this manifestation of everything's about the one, not about the team. And these, in the short term, can be very effective. The challenge is that for any long-term endeavor, these are incredibly destructive to the health of an organization and therefore long-term organizational results. And
also short-term mental health of your employees. If you've got a quick staff turnover and reputation problems, it can be devastating. I think many of us, listening today, have had a situation where we've hated our job, and it is debilitating to wake up in the morning and all you want is your mum to write you a note, even if you're in your 30s, to go, won't be going to work today. And we hear that statement time and time again, that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely. And it's been a really interesting reflection of my time in the private sector, which has been relatively short since I came out of the military, was that I have found success, and as I've talked to people as a coach, that there really isn't a good company or a good role or the perfect fit. There is a good boss who values your contribution and supports your development through the company. Now, admittedly, that's great for the individual, but companies are here to make a profit and to drive business results. So there's got to be this pairing of those two elements to make a successful whole.
So it's difficult because, as you say, it is definitely on the spectrum. There will be people who are clinically diagnosable as psychopaths. Have you read the Psychopath test by John Ronson, by the way?
I have before. I wouldn't, yes, but it's very interesting.
It's super interesting because if you haven't read it, John Ronson is a fantastic journalist. He wrote The Men That Stare at Goats. He wrote Salmon Fishing in the Yemen. And he wrote a book called The Psychopath Test, which is based on, I think it's a 20-point checklist by a psychologist called Hare, I believe. And he then starts diagnosing psychopaths just through his research. And what's really fascinating about it is he starts to diagnose people that he's seeing on the news, and he starts to look at his friends and go, maybe you're a psychopath. And then he starts to look at himself and go, well, God, maybe I'm a psychopath. And one of the experts he speaks to is the point of, if you're worried that you're a psychopath, you probably aren't. So it's a really fascinating read. I want to delve into this a little bit more about how to cope with a toxic workplace, how to navigate a boss who is making your life miserable? How can you protect your own energy? How can you compartmentalize? And when is it time to leave? And with you through until 4 o'clock this afternoon, we are talking leadership, we are talking toxic bosses, and so much more on the show today. If you've got any questions for our experts of the hour, do reach out. We're going to be hearing in just a minute from, I have to say executive coach, but we're talking about leadership. We're talking about values. Paul Littlejohn from Wingman Executive Coaching is in the studio because it's staggering, the data that we're seeing about psychopathic traits in leaders. And I needed to ask Dr. Thuraya from the Human Relations Institute and Clinic for her take. What are some of the telltale signs that your boss is indeed a psycho?
Pattern of telling lies or changing facts, definite lack of empathy. So they don't really show much concern for other people's feelings, and they really minimize how much their actions influence others. They tend to be quite charming, especially when they want to get something from somebody. They tend to sabotage other people's work, or maybe even steal other people's work and plagiarize it. They only tend to foster and care about relationships with people who can then help them progress their ambitions or their position in the company. They don't really have much regard for ethics or legality. They tend to be quite reckless, quite arrogant. They tend to pass blame on other people, and they have like impulsive behavior. So they tend to overall disregard organizational policies, ethics, and norms, especially interpersonal norms, unless it suits them. And then they kind of pretend that they are on track.
Paul Littlejohn, you were nodding along quite vigorously to some of Dr. Thuraya's points there. We were talking off air about values, about accountability. Would you mind bottom lining that for everyone listening today in terms of what you learnt through your military and how you're ultimately applying that to organisations of thousands of people here in the UAE?
Absolutely. It's really interesting as I hear Dr. Ryan talk about these things, because a lot of these behaviours, I have a very generous view of human beings, of people. We are.
I do too. I genuinely think most people are inherently good, and we need to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely. And so I think a lot of what we see in these studies and these reports is that these behaviours are mirrored. They're performative. They look like psychopathic behaviours, but these people are not psychopaths. They are just mirroring successful behaviours. And the problem is that, say, these unsustainable behaviours we talked about, they're not anchored in any values or ethics or standards that allow these good behaviours to thrive. Mm-hmm. In the military, we thrived people that were calculated risk takers, that did have a nuanced understanding of the value of rules, but their focus was on delivering a clear mission, and it was all bounded in a set of corporate cultural standards, values and behaviours that anchored all of these traits towards a positive good, with the underlying truth of it all being is that your people deliver the value and the mission. Mm-hmm. And your leadership is a role that is a supporting trait for those people that deliver the value.
That's interesting, because I don't think a lot of leaders would agree with that. Let's talk about the accountability piece.
Yes, so the very nature of leadership, as I was saying to you earlier on, at 21 years old, I was made a professional leader. And my role, without having deep industry expertise or domain expertise with the people I was in command of, was ultimately to take accountability for the results. Mm-hmm. If I decided that we did A or we did B, with the advice of my team or against the advice of my team, that was all my responsibility and my accountability. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that then leads to the way organizations function, is that you can't delegate accountability. And I think what we see with these psychopathic behaviors is effectively the delegation of accountability into teams that don't have the knowledge, the power, or really the pay packet to own that accountability. And that's very damaging. Again, now you start to undermine trust. Now you start to build this sense of lack of psychological safety, and that's where we see these big problems in business.
We are going to talk about some solutions. We've had a number of messages for you as well. But I wondered, we often talk about, managing your manager, and managing up can be really, really challenging in a work environment. How do you advise people who might come to you, and that can be at a dinner party or indeed in a professional setting, who are dealing with a boss that is making their life miserable, it's making the whole environment toxic, without putting themselves, their energy, their careers at risk?
And I have been there. In my short time in the private sector, I have been there, and it is exceptionally hard. Mm-hmm. Look, the first thing I highly recommend is people do start to keep documented notes of what's gone on. That contemporaneous records are useful, whatever happens. The second is to try and find some support, someone who can just give you some chat. Maybe they're feeling it as well. And then really it's about, your first step really is about setting meaningful boundaries.
Okay.
I have got X on my plate, boss. I expect to get this done by Friday. If you want this to done, I'm not going to do this. And try that. I can't promise it will work every time, but that's your first step. And then really to HR to find support.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned HR, because Ian's message saying HR here, in my experience, is completely ineffectual when it's senior leaders being challenged, that people are too afraid for their jobs.
And this is a perennial problem, is what is that accountability structure in the business? Who's holding people to account? And when I work with the very senior leaders, I make it very clear to them that the standards, values and culture that they speak about and they demonstrate is hugely important. If there's a famous saying in the military, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So as a CEO, if you see your management team behaving in this way and don't address it, it becomes accepted and normed. And HR are not going to be in a position to challenge that, because that is the norm, whatever's on the wall.
That's really, really interesting. We've got messages coming in on this topic. As I said, in the studio, we have got from Wingman Executive Coaching, Paul Littlejohn. We're going to be hearing from Dr. T as well, Dr. Thoraiya, giving her hot take on psychopaths in the workplace. She says there are a number of reasons why people with psychopathic traits might be attracted to leadership roles.
They have this really strong risk appetite, and they're often fearless and they are willing to take high risks. And in leadership, actually, that kind of appears to be quite innovative and courageous. They also tend to lack a lot of empathy, so their interaction with others is very strategic, and usually that strategy that they're looking for and the lack of empathy that they're looking for comes with this feeling of them wanting to control. And of course, the higher the role, the more likely you are to control a greater number of people and exert power and dominance over them, right? And so that reinforces their sense of grandiosity and their sense of importance. Their stress tolerance can be quite high, so they tend to be calm under pressure. And so it helps them seem as if they're composed and decisive, even though sometimes they might react in very harsh ways, but only to those that will not influence their power in any way. They tend to exploit a lot of people and manipulate. So if there is that type of environment in the workplace, then they will thrive. So they definitely have a competitive advantage in these hierarchical competitive environments.
Dr. Thoraiya, they're clinical psychologist from the Human Relations Institute in Clinic. She says there are some very important tools to arm yourself with. We're going to be unpacking those after 5:30 today. I've also got a brilliant prize talking workplace culture, organisation and toxic environments, because recent estimates suggest that 1 in every 5 CEOs is a psychopath. Same traits that make someone a successful leader can also describe some of the psychopathic traits. And joining us in studio is Paul Littlejohn of Wingman Executive Coaching. And we're hearing from Dr. Thoraiya as well, clinical psychologist. We've had a number of messages. And it just goes to show, Paul, actually, if you have a good boss and you enjoy your job, you're incredibly lucky. You really, really are.
Absolutely. And when I talk about leadership with people, that often this is the single biggest difference. I like my work. It really means I like my boss. And the difference you see in the discretionary effort and their commitment and their motivation to succeed is huge.
Because if you have got someone that you don't like, you don't respect, who doesn't like you or respect you, it's very easy to be like, well, you can get in the sea, if you're sending me a message outside of hours, or you being asked to go above and beyond for no overtime. But if you've built that goodwill and you're working towards a common goal, you've got a shared purpose, you've got shared values, and you feel like you're part of a team. I think that is, we use this word, team. I think we use the word leader all the time. But when we think about how you feel on a team, and I've had it before, working in magazines where I'm working ridiculous hours, but when you feel like you're on the same side, you actually quite enjoy it.
Absolutely. Shared adversity is an amazing feeling. But the paradox here is that neither side, if you wish to frame it that way, in this situation is happy. The refrain from management teams and senior leaders that I talk to is that why don't they just think? Why aren't they proactive? And my kind of challenge back is well, they are outside of work. They're organising barbecues at Safford Park. They're organising days out at the beach. They're travelling on holiday with their families. They are thinking. They are proactive. They're just not doing it at work.
Let's go to the text line. Jay's been in touch saying, "Hi both, I need some advice regarding my husband. Last year, his boss who took him on was sacked. New boss is very different. Feels like nothing he does is right, constantly criticised. How he handles the staff is questioned, even his expenses. The new boss is quite erratic in his moods, frequently shouts and walks out of meetings. It's really affecting my husband's mental health. He really would prefer a job we can go home and forget about it. But we've ended up with him being the breadwinner now by quite a margin. Life is too short. It's fine for him to leave, but he doesn't know what to do instead. He's trained for this job through university and now on the job, and he's mid-40s and feels stuck. Any pearls of wisdom?" Thank you, Jay.
Let me think. I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, we're seeing here this boss being the issue. Look, obviously trying to maintain and keep that job, trying to understand what it is this leader wants. And one of the things we have to do is be brave and be clear and try and get real clarity about what they want. Not to change subject too much, but Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, is a fantastic way of reframing questions to people of power. And I recommend a read and seeing if we can try and get what are they actually looking for, because that's the gap.
Yeah, exactly, that clarity.
But
then sometimes you're like, well, I'm never going to make you happy. I cannot make you happy.
No doubt. And ultimately, I've changed careers several times in my life, and I recognize that takes a lot of courage.
It does.
It takes essentially a certain amount of privilege to have that ability to take into that risk. But I think I agree that life is too short, and finding any way to put yourself in an environment where you can grow and you can flourish is certainly preferable.
Absolutely. It can't be underestimated, the knock-on effect it has when you're unhappy in your role, because it would be lovely to be able to compartmentalise and go, okay, well, I've left the office or I've put my phone away. No, of course it doesn't. You think about what people say to you, you think about emails, you think about expectations, and it inevitably spills over into family life and mental health. I think fresh perspective can be really, really helpful. So whether that's through coaching or having a chat with former colleagues and him getting an idea of where his strengths are and where his values are would be really helpful.
Absolutely. And building out that map, one of the things I do with clients is go through that kind of career framework, understanding how much value we've generated. We often don't realise what transferable skills we have.
Yeah. Thank you. You sound like an amazing wife, and wishing you both all the very best. We're talking about coaching today, but I think it's really important we're talking about psychology to get some tools in our toolkit. Dr. Thuraiya, clinical psychologist, says there are some things you should arm yourself with when dealing with a boss who's displaying psychopathic traits.
We're going to go right back to my favorite B word when we talk about tips on working with or for somebody who has psychopathic traits is boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. So make sure to set very clear boundaries on what you're comfortable with and maintain them consistently. Communicate your expectations, your responsibilities, and be very assertive. Stand your ground. Don't let people intimidate you, especially in a working environment, especially with psychopathic traits. You want to build a very strong support network. You want to make sure that everything is documented. So send emails as much as you can. Avoid verbal conversations. Keep the interactions very task-oriented. Make sure that your emotions are in check as much as possible, because the more emotion you show them, the more manipulative they can be. And make sure that a lot of the conversations that you have with individuals like that are very fact-centered, because if you don't focus on the facts, they might paint themselves as a victim or like you're trying to hurt them and things like that. So just maintain a very professional demeanor. Try not to become friends with them or anything like that. That does not work. Document as much as you can. I can't even stress this enough. Like, after my favorite B word of boundaries, document, my D word. Like, document absolutely everything. So send everything through emails. Have a great record. So just in case you need to go to HR or you need to, complain to the managers, you can do that. And definitely, if there's anything that you require, reach out to other people, see if they're experiencing the same thing. Make sure that you get a great support network, because they can be quite exhausting.
Dr. Thuraiya there with her final words. And I guess my question to you, Paul, any final words for you, what role do organisations play in identifying, addressing toxic leadership, and what feel like we haven't managed to get through in this segment so far?
I think the most important thing that companies can do is recognise that, and I think we might have said this, the leadership culture is the corporate culture. It doesn't matter what we've written on the wall. It doesn't matter what we've put in the handouts. It doesn't matter how sincerely HR goes around telling people this is our culture. Unless these behaviours are demonstrated from the very top of the organisation, then that culture will not stick. So I think that we've talked about what individuals can do to manage up. I think we need to recognize that it's exceptionally challenging for them to manage that environment, especially, as you said, in an environment whereby residency and income is all tied and medical is tied to a job. This makes it even harder. And then for leaders, for senior leaders, I talk to them, they recognize that they want to do bold things in the company, but this failure to join up the management and the workforce stops them committing to it. And I think there is a real need for owners, for founders, for CEOs to drive that improved culture so that they can get the benefits of a workforce that wants to help them.
Which is ultimately going to help their bottom line.
It's huge.
Paul Littlejohn, thank you so much. Wingman Executive Coaching. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And a topic, I think, that's resonated with an awful lot of people. I sincerely hope your boss is not a psychopath, but we've put some tools in the toolkit there. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries.
Weather check
with Air Arabia. Explore Vienna, Maldives, Warsaw.